My family betrayed me and stole the company I built from nothing. But karma crushed them, and now they're begging me to save what's left. Their family has always been about business. But let's be clear, they've never owned anything. They've spent their lives working under someone else, clocking in, and thinking they're living the dream because they got a decent paycheck and a pat on the back at the company Christmas party. Their dad was a corporate lifer, their uncle was in the same boat with just a fancier job title, and their brother wasn't anything special either, just another cog in the machine. They, however, weren't about to waste their life like that. They wanted something more. So, after slogging through some soul-sucking jobs to save up cash, they decided to start their own thing, a startup. They had a solid idea, but what they didn't have was enough money. That's when they turned to their family. They sat them down and pitched their business idea like they were on Shark Tank. They told them, "If you guys help me get investors, I'll give you stakes in the company." Simple, right? They weren't exactly doing them a favor, they were getting a piece of the pie if it worked out. To their surprise, their family actually came through. They didn't think their family would take them seriously at first. Their dad's the kind of guy who thinks entrepreneurship is just a fancy way of saying unemployed. But they pulled some strings, called up a few people they knew, and boom, they had investors. Not just any investors either, these were the real deal, people with money and connections. They were floored. For once they felt like their family actually believed in them. And their family didn't just stop at finding investors. They started getting involved in the business itself, tossing around ideas, offering advice, and even helping with some of the grunt work. They thought it was great at the time. They were like, wow, my family actually has my back. They didn't see it for what it really was. The beginning of their family worming their way into something they didn't build. They busted their ass getting this company off the ground. Late nights, early mornings, skipped meals. It was a grind like nothing they'd ever experienced before. But it paid off. By the second year, their startup blew up. They're talking real success. Enough money to make their heads spin. They were making deals left and right, and they finally felt like all their hard work was paying off. That's when their family started showing up more. At first, they didn't think much of it. Their dad and uncle quit their jobs to work with them full-time, and their brother did the same. They thought it was awesome. Who wouldn't want their family involved in something so personal and important? Their dad would show up to meetings, pretending he was the big boss, even though he didn't understand half the stuff they were discussing. Their uncle started acting like he was some kind of business guru because he had a background in finance. And their brother? That dude didn't know a thing about running a company, but he strutted around the office like he was Elon Musk or something. Looking back, there were so many red flags they should have seen, but they didn't. They were too caught up in the success to notice. How could they complain? Their company was thriving, and their family was finally coming together. Their brother and they, who used to fight like cats and dogs over the dumbest stuff, were actually getting along. They weren't arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash or who mom loved more. They were working together. It felt like their business had healed all the old wounds between them. They were proud. Hell, they thought this was what success was supposed to feel like. But man, were they wrong, so damn wrong. They think back to all the little things they ignored, like how their family kept telling them to watch their back around their friends and employees. They'd say things like, "You never know who's just trying to use you," or, "Be careful with your girlfriend, she might just be here for the money." At the time, they thought their family was looking out for them. Who wouldn't trust their own family? But now they realized they were planting seeds. They wanted them to think that the only people they could trust were them. And the worst part? They fell for it. At the time, they weren't even that rich. Sure, they were doing well, but they weren't rolling in cash like some billionaire. Their friends and employees weren't out to screw them over. They were just doing their jobs and living their lives. But their family, they were slowly positioning themselves, making sure they leaned on them for everything. The first real crack in the facade came during the pandemic. Everything went remote, and they started doing meetings online. That's when the power play started. Suddenly, their ideas weren't good enough anymore. The same ideas that built the company were now being shot down left and right. Their dad and uncle would gang up on them during meetings, and their brother would sit there like a smug little jerk, nodding along with whatever they said. They'd suggest their own half-baked ideas, acting like they were the saviors of the company. It was exhausting. They went from loving their job to dreading it. The company they built, the place that gave them a sense of purpose, was turning into a source of anxiety and stress. And the worst part? They didn't know how to stop it. Their family wasn't just employees, they were part owners now. They had stakes in the company, and they weren't afraid to use that power against them. At the time, they brushed it off, thinking it's just a rough patch, we'll get through it. But deep down, they think they knew things were starting to go downhill. Their family wasn't here to help them, they were here to take over, and they were too blind to see it. Looking back, they can't believe how stupid they were. The signs were all there, glaringly obvious, but they ignored every single one of them, because they were too wrapped up in the idea of having their family by their side. They thought, this is great, we're a team now. Yeah, a team of backstabbers waiting for the perfect moment to screw them over. It started small, like most betrayals do. During their online meetings, their family would interrupt them mid-sentence to offer their perspective. Their dad would say stuff like, "I don't think that's the right direction for the company," as if he had a clue what the right direction even was. Their uncle, Mr. Finance Genius, would constantly throw out buzzwords he barely understood. And their brother, that smug little jerk, would just sit there nodding along like their hype man, occasionally chiming in with, "Yeah, I agree with Dad." At first, they thought their family was just being overly enthusiastic. They were new to this level of business, so they figured they were trying to find their footing. But the interruptions turned into challenges, and the challenges turned into outright dismissals. The ideas they brought to the table, the same ideas that had gotten the company off the ground, were suddenly outdated or not innovative enough. It wasn't just during meetings either. Their brother started taking credit for stuff he had no hand in. They landed a big client, one they had been working on for months, and somehow he spun it like he was the one who made it happen. They let it slide because they didn't want to rock the boat. It's just a small thing, they told themselves. It's not worth the fight. But those small things started piling up. Then there were the constant family meetings. They'd corner them after work or during lunch breaks to talk about how they should be running the company. Their dad had this habit of saying, "You need to start thinking about the big picture," as if they hadn't been the one with the big picture to begin with. Their uncle kept bringing up these ridiculous cost-cutting measures that would have gutted the team. And their brother? He just parroted whatever they said, pretending he was this brilliant strategist when he couldn't strategize his way out of a paper bag. One time, during one of these so-called meetings, their dad told them, "You're too close to this. You need to let other people take the reins." They laughed it off at the time, thinking he was just being dramatic. But now they realize it wasn't just a suggestion, it was a warning. Their family wasn't here to help them run the company, they were here to take it from them. The breaking point came during the pandemic. They think being stuck at home gave their family too much time to scheme. They had to make some tough decisions, cutting costs, shifting priorities, that sort of thing. It was stressful as hell, but they were doing their best to steer the ship. That's when the mutiny started. During one of their online meetings, they brought up a plan to pivot some of their operations to adapt to the lockdowns. It was a solid idea, something they had put a lot of thought into. But before they could even finish explaining, their dad cut them off. "I don't think that's going to work," he said, like he was the CEO or something. Their uncle jumped in, agreeing with him, and their brother, because of course, sided with them. They proposed their own plan, which was basically just rehashing what they were already doing but with fancier words. They tried to push back, but their family steamrolled them. They had the majority vote, so their shitty plan got approved, and theirs got tossed aside. That meeting was the first time they felt like an outsider in their own company. They couldn't even recognize the business they had built. These people, their own family, were turning it into something else. Things got worse from there. Their brother, who had no clue how to manage anything, started acting like he was running the show. He'd send out emails to the team, signing off as if he were the CEO, and even started making decisions without consulting them. When they confronted him about it, he brushed it off. "I'm just taking initiative," he said, like they should be proud of him. Their dad and uncle weren't any better. They started holding meetings without them, making decisions behind their back. When they found out, their family acted like it was no big deal. "We didn't want to bother you," their dad said, as if they weren't the one who created this damn company in the first place. They tried to push back, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Their family had them outnumbered, and they knew it. Every time they brought up an issue, their family would gang up on them, making them feel like they were the problem. "You're being too emotional," their uncle would say, like they weren't allowed to care about the business they built from the ground up. And their brother, that little jerk, had the nerve to tell them, "Maybe you should take a step back and let us handle things for a while." The audacity of that guy still pisses them off when they think about it. By the time they hit the midpoint of the lockdowns, they were miserable. Their anxiety was through the roof, and they were having panic attacks before meetings. The company they once loved felt like a prison, and their family were the wardens. They knew something had to give, but they weren't ready to admit just how bad things had gotten. It wasn't until later that they realized what their family was doing. They weren't just undermining them, they were setting the stage to push them out entirely, and like an idiot, they let them. The whole situation turned into something straight out of a bad drama series, except it was their life. The writing was on the wall for a while, but they were too wrapped up in trying to fix things to see what was coming. It all started with a mid-year meeting. They came into the meeting prepared, thinking it would be a tough but straightforward discussion. They should have known better. Right out of the gate, their uncle, in all his smug glory, suggested that maybe they should be on the chopping block. At first, they thought it was a joke. Who says that to the person who built the company from scratch? But nope, he was dead serious. He started talking about how their brother had stepped up during the pandemic and was now handling most of the responsibilities. According to him, it only made sense for their brother to officially take over their role. They were floored. Their brother taking over their role? The same guy who thought profit margins were something you color-coded on a spreadsheet? The same guy who once confused gross revenue with net profit during a client presentation? You've got to be kidding them. Before they could even process what was happening, their dad chimed in. He had the audacity to suggest that they either step down voluntarily or accept a demotion in their own company. He said it with this fake-ass tone, like he was doing them a favor. Like he was being the reasonable one in the room. "We just think it's for the best," he said, as if they were some intern who had screwed up too many coffee orders. They looked around the virtual meeting, waiting for someone, anyone, to defend them. But no, their uncle nodded along like a bobblehead, and their brother, that little snake, didn't even have the guts to make eye contact with the camera. He just stared at his desk, probably hoping they wouldn't call him out. They tried to argue, but their family shut them down so fast it was like they'd rehearsed it. Their dad started talking about how business is business, and how they needed to separate their emotions from the company's needs. Their uncle backed him up, throwing in some nonsense about the greater good and how their brother was the natural leader now. The whole thing was a setup, and they walked right into it. Their family voted them out. Just like that, their own family voted them out of their company. They didn't even know what to say. They just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to figure out how the hell they'd let it get to this point. These were the people they trusted most in the world, and they stabbed them in the back without so much as a second thought. The rest of the meeting was a blur. Their family moved on like nothing had happened, talking about next steps and assigning responsibilities, their responsibilities, to their brother. It was like they didn't exist anymore. They logged off without saying a word. What could they say? Anything they wanted to scream at them would have just made them look even worse. After the meeting, they sat in their office for hours, staring at the wall. They couldn't believe it. Their family, their own flesh and blood, had just kicked them out of the company they built with their blood, sweat, and tears. They felt like an idiot for ever trusting them. All those late nights, all the sacrifices, all the times they went above and beyond to make sure the company succeeded. It didn't mean a thing to them. Their family saw an opportunity to take over, and they took it. They spent the next few days in a daze, trying to figure out what to do. Part of them wanted to fight back, to lawyer up and sue their asses into oblivion. But the other part of them, the part that was tired, broken, and just plain done, wanted to walk away. The thought of going back to that toxic environment made their skin crawl. They knew they wouldn't survive another day in that hellhole. In the end, they chose to resign. Maybe it was the coward's way out, but they couldn't do it anymore. They couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when it was tearing them apart inside. So, they wrote up their resignation letter, sent it off, and that was that. They were officially out. Leaving the company was like ripping off a scab that hadn't fully healed. It stung like hell, but there was a strange sense of relief too. They were free from the backstabbing and manipulation, but they were also out on their own with nothing but their savings and a bruised ego. It wasn't exactly a movie moment where the hero walks off into the sunset with a triumphant grin. No. It was more like walking into a storm, clutching a broken umbrella, and hoping to make it out alive. The first few months after resigning were rough. They had to move out of their cushy apartment and into a much smaller place to cut costs. Selling their car was next, which felt like another punch to the gut. That car was one of the few luxuries they'd allowed themselves after years of grinding, but it had to go. Their pride wasn't going to pay the bills. Starting over wasn't just about finances, though. It was about finding a way to rebuild their confidence. They spent weeks spiraling, questioning everything. Were they even capable of building another business? Or was their family right? Were they just lucky the first time? They hated that their family's voices were still in their head, even after they'd cut them out of their life. Eventually, they got tired of feeling sorry for themselves. One morning they woke up, looked around their tiny apartment, and thought, "This isn't it. This can't be where my story ends." That's when they decided to stop sulking and start working. They didn't know what the hell their next move was going to be, but they knew they had to make one. They started brainstorming ideas for a new business, something completely different from what they'd done before. They didn't want anything that reminded them of the old company or the people who ruined it for them. It had to be theirs. Something they could pour themselves into without anyone else's fingerprints on it. The first few ideas were trash, half-baked concepts that wouldn't have made it past the planning phase. But eventually, they landed on something that felt right. They won't get into the specifics, but let's just say it was an industry they were passionate about, and one they knew they could excel in. The problem? They didn't have the kind of cash they had when they started their first company. Back then, they had investors and family support. Now, it was just them, their savings, and a few favors they could call in. It was terrifying, but at the same time, it was exhilarating. For the first time in years, they felt like they were in control of their own destiny. No one else was pulling the strings. Building the new business was a grind, even harder than the first time. They were working 12 to 14-hour days, juggling a million tasks at once. Some days, they didn't even know if they'd have enough money to make it to the next week. They lived off ramen and instant coffee, the kind of diet that screams broke entrepreneur. But they didn't care. Every small step forward felt like a victory. The loneliness was the hardest part. Their family was gone, blocked on every platform they could think of. They didn't deserve access to their life anymore. They cut ties with anyone who even remotely reminded them of their family, which meant their social circle got a lot smaller. The only person who stuck around was their wife. She was their rock, the one person who believed in them even when they didn't believe in themselves. If it weren't for her, they don't think they would have made it through those first few months. About a year in, things finally started turning around. The new business began to take shape, and by some miracle it started generating revenue. It wasn't much at first, just enough to keep the lights on, but it was a start, and that was all they needed, a small glimmer of hope to keep them going. By the second year, the business was thriving. It wasn't just doing well, it was doing better than their first company ever had. They finally felt like they were back on solid ground. And the best part? This time, they were surrounded by people they trusted. No family drama, no backstabbing, just a tight-knit team of people who believed in the vision as much as they did. Cutting off their family was one of the hardest decisions they'd ever made, but it was also the most freeing. They didn't just block their numbers, they erased them from their life completely. Their dad, their uncle, their brother, they were dead to them. Not literally, obviously, but you get the point. These were people who had no problem screwing them over when it suited them, and they weren't about to let them back in just because things were finally going well for them. At first, they didn't even think about their family. They were so focused on rebuilding their life that their family didn't cross their mind. But every now and then, a memory would creep in. A moment from before things went to hell. They'd remember the good times, like when their brother and they used to play video games together, or when their dad gave them advice about life. Those memories made it harder to stay angry. But then they'd remind themselves of what their family did. They didn't just betray them, they betrayed everything they were supposed to stand for as a family. And that's not something you just forgive and forget. Then came the shocker. They found out their old company was tanking. A mutual friend who used to work there gave them the rundown. After they left, their family basically stopped giving a damn. Their dad, their uncle, and their brother treated it like their personal ATM, draining money to buy luxury cars and other crap they didn't need. Meanwhile, They let the actual business fall apart. Employees started leaving in droves, clients jumped ship, and the company that they built from nothing was circling the drain. Hearing that pissed them off more than they thought it would. They'd worked their ass off to make that company a success, and their family destroyed it in less than 2 years. Part of them wanted to gloat, to laugh at their failure, but another part of them just felt sad, not for their family, obviously, they deserved whatever was coming to them, but for the company. It didn't deserve to go down like that. By the time they heard about their family's mess, they were already too far gone emotionally to care. Their focus was on their new business, their new life, and the people who actually gave a damn about them. As far as they were concerned, their family could sink with the ship they'd stolen from them. They were finally in a good place. Their new business was thriving, their personal life felt stable, and they'd moved on, or at least they thought they had. But of course, life has a way of dragging you back into the mess you thought you'd escaped. And surprise, surprise, the mess came in the form of their brother. It all started when they were reviewing resumes for a senior position in their company. They'd worked their ass off to build a solid team, and now they were growing fast enough to start filling higher-level roles. They were scrolling through the shortlisted candidates when they saw his name, their brother. Seeing his name on that list was like getting sucker punched. Their first reaction was to laugh. What the hell was this guy doing applying for a job? Didn't he still have their old company to play pretend CEO with? But the more they thought about it, the more curious they got. Something didn't add up. There was no way he'd be applying for a job unless things had really gone to hell. They decided to schedule the interview, not because they wanted to hire him, but because they needed answers. The day of the interview, he walked into their office looking like a ghost of his former self. He'd aged at least 10 years in the span of 2. His suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and he had this defeated look on his face, like life had beaten him into submission. For a second, just a second, they felt bad for him, but then they remembered everything he did to them, and any sympathy they had disappeared. He froze when he saw them sitting behind the desk, his jaw tightened, and they could see the panic in his eyes. But he tried to play it cool. "Michael," he said, forcing a smile, "I didn't know this was your company." Small world, they said, keeping their tone neutral. "Let's get started, shall we?" The interview was awkward, painfully so. He stumbled over basic questions and gave vague, half-assed answers about his experience. It was obvious he wasn't qualified for the job, not even close. But they let him dig his own grave. They stayed professional, taking notes and nodding along, even though their brain was screaming, "Are you serious right now?" By the time they wrapped up, they'd made up their mind. There was no way in hell they were hiring him. As he stood to leave, they hit him with the same line he'd thrown at them during that fateful meeting years ago. "I think your contributions would be better suited to a lower-level role. You might want to consider applying for something more appropriate." The look on his face was priceless. He went from shocked to pissed in about 2 seconds flat. "Are you kidding me?" he snapped. "This is unprofessional as hell. You're letting your personal feelings cloud your judgment." They leaned back in their chair, trying not to laugh. "You're free to leave if you don't like it," they said, echoing his own words from all those years ago. And just like that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. They thought that was the end of it, but of course, it wasn't. Within hours, their phones started blowing up. Texts, calls, voicemails, all from their family. Their dad accused them of sabotaging their brother's career out of spite. Their uncle went on a rant about how they were disrespecting the family. Even their mom, who had been mostly silent throughout this whole ordeal, chimed in, begging them to be the bigger person and give their brother another chance. The cherry on top? Their wife. She'd always been supportive of them, but even she started questioning their decision. "Maybe you should reconsider," she said one night. "He has a family to support. Kids, Michael. Think about the kids." They wanted to scream. Why was everyone acting like this was their problem? Their brother had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. He didn't care about them when he was voting them out of their own company, so why the hell should they care about him now? But the guilt started creeping in. As much as they hated to admit it, they couldn't shake the image of him sitting in their office, looking like a broken man. Were they being petty? Were they letting their anger get the best of them? They didn't know anymore. A few days later, they got a call from a mutual friend who used to work at their old company. He filled in the blanks for them, and holy hell, it was worse than they thought. Apparently, After they left, their family treated the business like their personal piggy bank. They bought luxury cars, threw lavish parties, and basically acted like royalty. Meanwhile, the actual business was falling apart. Clients were leaving, employees were quitting, and the company was hemorrhaging money. By the time the pandemic ended, it was a complete disaster. They thought the company would run itself, their friend said. They didn't realize how much work you were actually doing. Hearing that felt like a twisted kind of validation. They weren't crazy, they weren't imagining things. Their family had been riding their coattails all along. Without them, they were nothing. But the validation didn't make the situation any less messy. Now they had a decision to make. Part of them wanted to swoop in and buy the company back. It was still salvageable, according to their friend, but only if it was under new management. And by new management, they meant anyone but their dad, uncle, or brother. They'd have to cut them out completely, which wouldn't be easy. Their family would fight them every step of the way. But honestly, they were ready for it. The other part of them wanted to walk away and let their family burn. They made their bed, and now they could deal with the consequences. Why should they step in and save them from their own stupidity? In the end, they decided to meet with their family. Not because they wanted to reconcile, but because they wanted closure. They needed to tell them face to face that they were out, and that they were taking back what was theirs. No more games, no more manipulation, just the cold, hard truth. When they walked into that meeting, their family looked desperate. Their dad tried to play it cool, but they could see the panic in his eyes. Their uncle was fidgeting, and their brother wouldn't even look at them. They knew they were screwed. "I'll buy the company," they said, cutting straight to the point. "But under one condition, you're all out. No stakes, no positions, nothing. You walk away with the cash, and that's it." Their family argued, of course. Their dad said it was unfair. Their uncle claimed he deserved a role. And their brother, well, he just sat there sulking. But in the end, they caved. They needed the money more than they needed the pride. Walking out of that meeting felt damn good. For the first time in years, they felt like they'd won. They took back what was theirs, and they did it on their terms. Their family can keep their guilt trips and their sob stories. They're done with them.